But I also think in these harsh economic times, it is far, far from the kind of legislation that we owe the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Senator from Nevada is recognized.
I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to discuss one of the biggest threats to economic growth in our country, and that's this administration's job-killing regulatory agenda. My goal in the Senate is to promote policies that create jobs. With my home state of Nevada leading the nation in unemployment, I do not believe that the private sector is doing just fine, and support common-sense policies that give our job creators the necessary tools to provide for long-term economic growth. Under the current administration, they seem bent upon issuing regulation after regulation that threatens existing jobs and preventing new ones from being created. As I have stated before, you cannot be pro-jobs and anti-business at the same time. With unemployment at 11.7% in Nevada, and it continues to lead the nation in unemployment, the only things as scarce as jobs in Nevada are private property and water. Roughly 87% of Nevada is controlled by the federal government, and the remaining 13% is heavily regulated by the federal government also. Nevada is also one of the driest states in the nation. Because of this, water is a very precious commodity. As we debate the Farm Bill, I'm proud to join with some of my colleagues in their efforts to provide some much-needed regulatory relief for American farmers in rural America. However, the latest efforts by this administration go well beyond the agricultural sector. For years, there's been a concerted effort to expand the regulatory reach over water in this country. After years of failed attempts to legislatively change the scope of regulatory authority over water, the EPA is now trying to overturn both congressional intent and multiple Supreme Court decisions to further their goal of overregulation. To put it into context, if this regulation were enacted, it would give the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers the ability to regulate irrigation ditches, large mud puddles, or anything that contains standing water, regardless of whether or not it's permanent, seasonal, or man-made. Never before under the Clean Water Act have federal regulations extended this far. This is not the intent of Congress when writing the Clean Water Act, and Congress has repeatedly rejected any legislative effort to alter the existing law. More disturbing, the administration has bypassed public outreach and has neglected to consider the economic impact of their proposed action. This is in addition to ignoring the fact that the Supreme Court twice affirmed the limits of the federal authority under the Clean Water Act. But apparently the EPA believes that it does not have to adhere to the laws of the land. Expanding the federal regulatory overreach into water also infringes on private property rights. It stops investments in development, infrastructure projects including housing, schools, hospitals, roads, highways, agriculture, and energy. In my home state, this regulation will hurt farming, ranching, mining, and construction, the same middle-class blue-collar jobs this administration claims to care about. In an already struggling economy, we cannot afford to create additional regulatory barriers that will cost jobs and prevent future economic growth. This is why Senators Barrasso, Inhofe, Sessions, and I have offered an amendment to the Farm Bill, as well as a standalone piece of legislation that would preserve the current definition of waters of the United States. To preserve the waters of the U.S. Act is simply straightforward legislation that would preserve current definition of federal waters as well as uphold private property rights. Opposition to this legislation has been disingenuous. It is ridiculous to assert that I or any other supporter of this important legislation are opposed to clean water. What I am opposed to is the federal government continuing its overreach and further hurting our economy and jeopardizing personal property rights and states' rights. I am opposed to giving Washington bureaucrats the authority to regulate your backyard. And I'm opposed to this administration using closed-door process to issue job-killing regulations that have become far too common. I had hoped for a vote on this amendment that will allow the Senate to make a clear choice between jobs and an extreme environmental agenda. Unfortunately, the amendment process has once again been broken down, and we will not have the ability to openly debate this important issue. I encourage my colleagues to support the Preserve the Waters of the U.S. Act and show their constituents that they stand with job creators. There is a vast and diverse coalition of support for our efforts to limit the federal government's overreach. It includes local governments, municipalities, manufacturers, small businesses, and many more. As an outdoorsman, I am committed to good stewardship of our natural resources and believe that we do not have to choose between a healthy environment and economic prosperity. The Preserve the Waters of the U.S. Act is a common-sense solution that will prevent jobs from being destroyed and keep private property rights from being further eroded by this federal government. I respectfully urge all my colleagues to support this legislation and bring it to a vote. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Vermont is recognized.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I will be speaking about two amendments which I intend to offer as part of the Farm Bill. I think both amendments are extremely important, and both amendments have the support of the vast majority of the people of our country. They may not have the support of powerful special interests, but I think that from Maine to California, people will be supporting these amendments. And the first one is Amendment number 2310, which is co-sponsored by Senator Barbara Boxer of California. Mr. President, all across our country, people are becoming more and more conscious about the foods that they are eating and the foods that they are serving to their kids. And this is certainly true for genetically engineered foods. This is a major concern in my state of Vermont. It's a major concern, I know, in Senator Boxer's state of California, and in fact, it is a major concern all over our country. This year, in my state of Vermont, our legislature tried to pass a bill that would have required foods that contain genetically engineered ingredients to have that information on their labels. And that information would simply give consumers in the state of Vermont the knowledge about the ingredients that were in the food that they are ingesting. Not, I believe, a terribly radical idea. I personally believe, and I think most Americans believe, that when a mother goes to the store and purchases food for her child, she has the right to know what she is feeding her child, what is in the food that she's giving to her kids and her family. This concern about genetically engineered labeling brought out a huge turnout to the Vermont State Legislature of people who were supportive of this concept. In fact, it was one of the most hotly debated and discussed issues in our legislature this year. Over 100 Vermonters testified at a committee meeting, the Agricultural Committee meeting of the state of Vermont, in favor of this legislation. We're a small state, and hundreds more crowded in the State House to show their support. So what people in Vermont, and I believe all over this country, are saying simply and straightforwardly is we want to know what is in the food we are eating and whether or not that food is genetically engineered. Clearly, this is not just a Vermont issue. Almost 1 million people in the state of California signed a petition to get labeling of genetically engineered food on the November ballot. And in California, big state, 1 million people is a lot of people. In other words, what we are seeing from Vermont and California all over this country, people want to know what is in the food that they are eating, and they want to know whether that food is genetically engineered. And I want to thank Senator Boxer of California for representing the people of her state in co-sponsoring this legislation. But this is not just a Vermont issue, it's not just a California issue. According to an MSNBC poll in February of 2011, 95% of Americans agree that labeling of food with genetically engineered ingredients should be allowed, and those polling numbers have been consistently over 90%, dating back to 2001. So what we are seeing in polling year after year is people want to know what is in the food that they are eating. Now, not everybody agrees. Monsanto, one of the world's largest producers of genetically engineered food, they don't like this idea. Monsanto is also the world's largest producer of the herbicide Roundup, as well as so-called Roundup-ready seeds that have been genetically engineered to resist the pesticide. It is no mystery why Monsanto would fight people's right to know. Business is booming for this huge chemical company. It raked in over $11 billion in revenues and cleared $1.6 billion in profits in 2011, and this year is going pretty well for Monsanto. So once it seemed possible that Vermont could pass the bill because the people of the state of Vermont wanted to see that legislation passed. But our friends at Monsanto threatened to sue the state if that bill was passed. Sadly, and this is what goes on in politics, not just on this issue, but on so many issues, despite passing out of the House Agricultural Committee by a vote of 9-1, the bill didn't make it any further because of the fear of a lawsuit from this huge multinational corporation. But today, we have an opportunity with the Sanders-Boxer Amendment, number 2310, to affirm states' rights to label food that contained genetically engineered ingredients. This amendment recognizes that the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution clearly reserves powers to our system of federalism to the states and to the people. In other words, that's what federalism is about. This amendment acknowledges that states have the authority to require the labeling of foods produced through genetic engineering or derived from organisms that have been genetically engineered. Simply put, this amendment gives people the right to know. It says that a state, if its legislature so chooses, may require that any food or beverage containing a genetically engineered ingredient offered for sale in that state have a label that makes that information public and clear. It also requires that the commissioner of the FDA, with the Secretary of Agriculture, shall report to Congress within 2 years on the percentage of food and beverages in the United States that contain genetically engineered ingredients. Mr. President, there are strong precedents for labeling. The FDA, as everybody knows, already requires the labeling of over 3,000 ingredients, additives, and processes. If you want to know if your food contains gluten, aspartame, high fructose corn syrup, trans fats, or MSG, you simply read the ingredients label. Similarly, the FDA requires labeling for major food allergens such as peanuts, wheat, shellfish, and others. But Americans, for some reason, are not afforded that same information when it comes to genetically engineered foods. Now, here is a very important point to make. What I am asking now for the people of America is something that exists right now all over the world. Genetically engineered foods are already required to be labeled in 49 countries around the world, including Russia, the UK, Australia, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, China, New Zealand, and others, and the entire European Union allows its countries to require such labels, which is essentially what this amendment is about. It is not telling, but it is requiring, it is allowing states the right to go forward if that is what the people of those states want. So if this is good for 49 or more countries around the world, why is it not acceptable in the United States of America? And the answer is pretty simple, that we have a large, powerful, multinational corporation who is more concerned about their own profits than they are about allowing the American people to know what is in the food that they are eating. Let me clarify just a few pieces of information regarding genetically engineered foods. Monsanto claims that there's nothing to be concerned about with genetically engineered foods. In the 1990s, there was a consensus among scientists and doctors at the FDA that GE foods could have new and different risks, such as hidden allergens, increased plant toxin levels, and the potential to hasten the spread of antibiotic-resistant disease. But those concerns were quickly pushed aside in the name of biotechnology progress. Their concerns were not, however, unfounded. In May 2012, a landmark independent study by Canadian doctors published in the peer-reviewed journal Reproductive Toxicology found the toxin from soil bacterium, which had been engineered into Bt corn to kill pests, was present in the bloodstream of 93% of pregnant women, as well as in 80% of their fetal cord blood. In the wake of this study, action is being taken. In 3 days, on June 17th, the American Medical Association will consider resolutions that ask for studies on the impacts of GE foods and labeling. Resolutions calling for labeling of GE foods have already been passed by the American Public Health Association and the American Nurses Association. There is a great need for this information because there has never been mandatory human clinical trials of genetically engineered crops, no test for its possibility of causing cancer or for harm to fetuses, no long-term testing for human health risks, no requirement for long-term testing on animals, and only limited allergy testing. What this means is that for all intent and purposes, the long-term health study on GE food is being done on the American people. We are the clinical test. Now, let me clarify just a few things about labeling genetically engineered food. GE food labels will not increase costs to shoppers. Everybody knows that companies change their labels all the time. They market their products differently, and adding a label does not change this. In fact, many products already voluntarily label their food as, quote, GMO-free, end of quote. Further, genetically engineered crops are not better for the environment. For example, the use of Monsanto Roundup Ready soybeans engineered to withstand exposure to the herbicide Roundup has caused the spread of Roundup-resistant weeds, which now infest 10 million acres in 22 states, with predictions of 40 million acres or more by mid-decade. Resistant weeds increase the use of herbicides and the use of older and more toxic herbicides. Further, there are no international agreements that prohibit the mandatory identification of foods produced through genetic engineering, but as I mentioned, 49 other countries already require it. Mr. President, the Sanders-Boxer Consumers' Right to Know about Genetically Engineered Food Amendment, Amendment number 2310, is about allowing states to honor the wishes of their residents and allowing consumers to know what they are eating. If this is not a conservative amendment, I don't know what is. Americans deserve the right to know what they and their children are eating, and that is what this amendment is all about. Monsanto and other major corporations should not be the ones to decide this issue. The United States Congress and the American people should make that decision. Without common sense labeling requirements, the 295 million American citizens who favor labeling, the overwhelming majority of Americans who in poll after poll after poll said yes, they want to know whether the food they are eating contains genetically engineered products, they are not being listened to. So on behalf of the American people who want to know what is in their food, I urge support for this important amendment. Mr. President, I have another amendment, but I am going to come back at another time to talk about the amendment which would demand that the Commodities Future Trading Commission do what the law requires them, and that is end excessive speculation in the oil futures market. But I'll hold off on that till a later time. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at 12 noon today the Senate proceed to executive session and that the motion to proceed to the motion to reconsider the cloture vote by which cloture was not invoked on Executive Calendar 501 be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be agreed to, and that there be 30 minutes for debate equally divided in the usual form, and that following the use or yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to vote on cloture on the nomination upon reconsideration.
Is there objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
With that, Mr. President, observe the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call. Mr. Turcotte.
Senators continuing to work on a 5-year farm bill proposal. As you hear speeches on amendments to the bill. A little bit later, we could see debate on a procedural motion dealing with the flood insurance bill. Also coming up, a procedural vote on an ambassador nomination, Marie Carmen Aponte, to be ambassador to El Salvador, and that vote is set for 12:30 Eastern. Farm bill debate could last for several more days. Still no agreement on amendments. The House today not in, and as a matter of fact, the House not in all this week. Members are in recess for a district work period. Legislative work continues Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Without objection, so ordered. The senator from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I have 8 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to spend a few moments talking about one of our titles, our job-creating titles in the Farm Bill. But first, I do want to thank colleagues that are continuing to work through us as we do the business of the Senate, working through the amendment process and coming together with what I'm optimistic will be an agreement for us to be able to move forward to complete our task on the Farm Bill. But I want to continue to thank my ranking member, Senator Roberts, for his leadership, and his staff and my staff working together so hard. A lot of coffee involved, Mr. President, for folks to be able to stay awake on some late nights right now, but they're doing a great job, and we are very optimistic as we move forward in this process. And one of the reasons we need to get this done, as I have stressed many times, but it's worth repeating again, is that this is a jobs bill. As the distinguished presiding officer knows from Ohio, as well as myself in Michigan, where jobs are a big deal, as they are across the country, but we've been in the middle of it in terms of the recession, and we're now seeing optimism because we are recommitting ourselves to make things and grow things in this country. We make a lot of great things in Michigan, not the least of which are automobiles, but a lot of other things also. And I know in Ohio as well, a great state for making things. But both of our states are also states where we grow things. And I appreciate the leadership of the presiding officer who is on our Agriculture Committee and has played a very significant role in getting us to this point. Major reforms in this bill that relate to moving to a risk-based system to support our farmers, and based on a proposal that the distinguished senator, the presiding officer, Senator Brown, has put forward, a bipartisan proposal. Appreciate very much your leadership on that, as well as a number of other things. But it is about growing things. Almost 1 out of 4 people in Michigan have a job because we grow things. We have more diversity of crops than any state but California. And so that means every page of the Farm Bill matters to Michigan, and which is why over the years I've paid attention to every single page of the Farm Bill. But overall in our country, 16 million people work because of agriculture. They may be involved in production, they may be involved in packaging, they may be involved in processing, they may make the farm equipment, maybe a variety of things, but they work because we grow things in America. Our one area of huge trade surplus, where we've grown in the last few years 270%, our trade surplus is in agriculture. We are growing things here, creating jobs here, and exporting. And so this is a jobs bill. And I want to talk today specifically about a very important piece where we bring together making things and growing things in our economy, and that's the energy title of the Farm Bill. The energy title reflects the important work being done by America's farmers, ranchers, forest managers, rural small businesses to help improve our energy security. Since we added this title in 2002, I was pleased to be a strong supporter of doing that. The Rural Energy for America program has helped put in place nearly 8,000 projects and jobs, by the way, that help farmers lower their energy bills and actually produce electricity that goes back to the electric grid. In the last 10 years, we have seen incredible advances in advanced biofuels and bio-based manufacturing, which really is the ultimate of bringing together, making things, and growing things, both of which are supported and strengthened in this bill. The Farm Bill is also an energy bill. It's a jobs bill. There are more than 3,000 companies doing innovative bio-based manufacturing, using agricultural products instead of petroleum to manufacture finished products. And those companies have already created over 100,000 jobs and growing every day. Many of these businesses are in rural communities. Supporting those businesses is one of the best ways that we can create jobs and economic growth in small towns all across our country. This kind of manufacturing is also a win-win for the farmers. They get new markets for their products, in some cases markets for their waste products. We've also seen tremendous growth in biofuels. This Farm Bill shifts our focus to the next generation of advanced biofuels, like cellulosic ethanol, to continue lowering prices for families at the pump. According to a study by the University of Wisconsin and the University of Iowa, ethanol has already helped keep gas prices more than $1 lower than they otherwise would be. It's the only competition we have at the moment at the pump. And what we need as consumers is more choice, more competition, so that depending on foreign oil is not the only choice. Many of our colleagues have different feelings about our energy policies, and the great thing about the Farm Bill is that it doesn't matter what you believe, no matter where you come from, it's a winner because it creates choices. If you want to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, this bill is a winner. If you want to make America more energy independent so we aren't relying so much on foreign oil, this bill is a winner. If you want farmers to pay lower energy bills so they have more money to hire workers and improve their business, this bill is a winner. And if you want Americans to pay lower prices at the gas pump, as we all do, this bill is a winner for every American. I especially want to thank Senator Conrad, Lugar, Harkin, Nelson, Ben Nelson, Senator Bennett, Brown, Klobuchar, Thune, Casey, and Hoeven, who worked very hard at putting together the energy title and the necessary funding to continue supporting these innovative farmers and businesses all across our country. I appreciate their leadership in working with us in being able to get this done. So let me talk about some of the specific areas that we have in the energy title. There's something called the Rural Energy for America program, REAP. It's one of the most successful programs in the energy title and one that we hear about most often from farmers and ranchers across the country. This program helps farmers with loan guarantees and grants to purchase and install renewable energy systems and make energy efficiency upgrades. Farmers have been able to put solar panels, wind turbines, as well as biomass energy and geothermal and hydroelectric and other forms of renewable energy technology on the farm. Since 2003, REAP has supported 7,997 different energy-efficient projects that have generated or saved 6.5 million megawatt hours, enough power to meet the annual needs of nearly 600,000 households. Now, I also want to say as a caveat that when we talk about all these alternatives, I also see this from the standpoint of making things, Mr. President, because when we look at a big wind turbine, a lot of folks see energy use. I see 8,000 parts. We can make every one of them in Michigan, probably an awful lot of them in Ohio. So when we talk about creating energy efficiency opportunities, we're also talking about creating manufacturing jobs in the process. REAP is a big success story, which is why we continued the program, streamlined the application process for farmers and small businesses applying for small and medium-sized projects. Each project funded by REAP can make a significant impact, as I said, on utility costs incurred by the businesses. For example, one company in Georgia created an on-farm solar system that will produce about 60,000 kilowatt hours per year to lower the company's power bills. Another Kentucky company used an energy efficiency grant to improve lighting and support a refrigeration freezer project that would give them 63% energy savings. 63%. It's a pretty big deal when you're paying the bills. Next thing I'd like to do is talk about something called bio-based markets and part of a larger bio-based manufacturing effort that I am very enthused about. Bio-based manufacturing is rapidly becoming a critical component of our new economy. According to USDA, there are 3,118 registered bio-based companies in the United States that have created so far about 100,000 jobs and growing. With customers demanding more choices, oil prices rising, these innovative companies are taking new approaches, turning agricultural products into manufactured products. And so as you can see, Mr. President, all across the country, 3,000 companies, and this is a huge area of growth and innovation for us, where we literally are taking agricultural products, replacing chemicals, replacing petroleum and plastics, doing a variety of things that allow us to create new markets for farmers, get us off of foreign oil, and create jobs. And I would argue that in the next 5 years we will see many, many, many more dots on this map as a result of the Farm Bill and private sector efforts that are going on across the country. In the 2008 Farm Bill, we created the bio-based program to develop and expand markets for these bio-based products. And here's just a few examples. Excuse me. PaperMate makes a biodegradable, retractable grip pen manufactured by Sanford Newell Rubbermaid in Georgia. This pen is made from biodegradable components that include an exclusive corn-based material to produce less waste and more compost on the pen. Perel, Advanced Green Certified Instant Hand Sanitizer. The green certified product made by a company in Ohio containing ingredients from renewable resources. It kills more than 99.9% of most germs, Mr. President, and it's a product that is biodegradable. Greenware cold portion cups made by Fabri-Kal Corporation in Michigan are made from materials such as plant-based and post-consumer recycled resins. My colleagues will note that this looks familiar because it's the same kind of cup that we use in the Senate. This is something that we are using in supporting the bio-based economy. By including bio-based manufacturing in the Biorefinery Assistance Program within the Energy Title, we are expanding economic opportunities for farmers by giving them new markets for crops to grow, and we're supporting cutting-edge manufacturing businesses who are making these products and creating these jobs. We also have done other pieces that will strengthen this effort. And I might mention, while we don't have a picture of it with us on a chart, that one of the exciting things that I'm seeing in Michigan as we bring together making things and growing things, the extent to which our automakers are using bio-based products in the making of automobiles. And so for anyone who is buying a new Ford vehicle today, or I sound like an advertisement, Mr. President, but new Ford vehicle or a great new Chevy Volt or a number of other vehicles that we have, great American-made vehicles, today you are sitting on seats made from soy-based foam. You have soybean in the seats. Soy-based foam, this actually started over 80 years ago with Henry Ford and has been something focused on and off for 80 years, but now it's becoming a major effort. A major corporation in Michigan, Lear, is making these seats, and they're biodegradable, they're lightweight, you get better fuel economy, and as I often tell my friends, if you get hungry, you've got something to munch on. So the truth is that we are seeing huge advances. If you may very well have cup holders in your car that have a corn-based or wheat-based or other kind of agricultural base in the plastic rather than petroleum. Another way we get off of foreign oil. They're experimenting with tires rather than using petroleum in tires. I think there's an explosion here of opportunity around innovation with our farmers and our manufacturers, with our universities, our scientists. It is very exciting and is part of the next generation for us of a new economy and new jobs. This Farm Bill strengthens that effort, working with the private sector to help us rapidly move forward on jobs. And one of the other ways we do that, in addition to supporting efforts to create commercialization of products, to be able to move forward as it relates to creating, producing more products and so on, is to give consumers a way to find these products. So we have something called the USDA Certified Bio-Based Product Label. The mission of the Bio Preferred Program is to develop and expand markets for bio-based products through preferred federal purchases of bio-based products across the federal government and a voluntary labeling program to raise consumers' awareness and to help make sure that you know what you're buying is in fact a bio-based product. Since the program was created in the last Farm Bill, 2008, there are now 64 different categories of bio-based products and almost 9,000 products approved for preferred federal purchases. In everybody's best interest for us to be encouraging these new markets, encouraging innovation, at the same time addressing other critical needs for our country, including getting off of foreign oil. In addition, another 430 products from 150 companies have been certified to carry the USDA Certified Bio-Based Product Label. So this is an important way, and there's new efforts happening. The President, the Secretary of Agriculture, and I have come together to urge, in fact, that we increase the amount of bio-based labeling that's going on and make sure that consumers are looking for this label. We then have the Biorefinery Assistance Program, which is a very important piece of all of this. The Biorefinery Assistance Program was originally created in the 2002 Farm Bill to support the development and construction of demonstration-scale biorefineries to determine the commercial viability of some of the processes that are involved in converting renewable biomass to advanced biofuels. It also guarantees loans for companies that are developing, constructing, or retrofitting commercial-scale biorefineries using these new technologies. In just the last 2 years, companies participating in this effort have created nearly 300 direct jobs, and it's estimated that as this program is written into the 2012 Farm Bill, it will help innovative businesses hire another 450 people as well. We also expand eligibility for the program to include bio-based manufacturing. And, Mr. President, this is a very important piece of this. We are now going from refineries, talking about advanced biofuels, to expanding the opportunity for tools for our bio-based manufacturers within the rubric of the energy title and the focus on jobs. We're talking about loan guarantees for companies to leverage private dollars. So for just over $400 million in loan guarantees, we've leveraged $1.5 billion in private dollars to help companies with the cost of retrofitting and building a new commercial biofuel plant. When operational, these facilities are expected to produce 113 million gallons of advanced biofuels and generate almost 25 million kilowatt hours of renewable energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by an estimated 600,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. which, by the way, is the equivalent of taking 11,000 cars off the road. So I have a little bit of a mixed feeling about that. No, actually, we'd much prefer to do it this way and keep great new advanced vehicles on the road. In 2011, the USDA awarded $6.9 million in grants and $13.1 million in loan guarantees to 17 anaerobic digester projects. So we're talking about waste on the farm, turning it into energy, and that would have created enough power to create energy for 10,000 homes. There's so many opportunities for us, whether it's animal waste, food waste. We have a facility in Michigan that will be opening in the fall that is up by Gerber Baby Food. We are the international home of Gerber Baby Food in Fremont, Michigan. There is a new bio-based facility opening up that will use all the food waste to generate energy, electricity, for the northwestern area of Michigan. So there's so many opportunities for us right now using, again, food waste, byproducts from agriculture, and so on, where we can blend those together and create jobs, get us off of foreign oil. The Biorefinery Assistance Program has helped build 7 first-of-the-kind biorefineries to produce advanced biofuels in states from Florida to Oregon, Michigan, as I said, to New Mexico. And one of the companies, INEOS, New Plant Bioenergy, has just begun commissioning their plant in Indian River County, Florida, which will use citrus and other municipal solid waste to produce 8 million gallons of cellulosic ethanol every year, 6 megawatts of renewable electricity. They have over 100 people working on the job, completing this first-of-a-kind plant using 85% U.S. manufactured equipment, by the way, for the facility. So there's so many things. I could spend a long time going through all of the exciting efforts going on literally from the East Coast to the West Coast, North and South, where creative entrepreneurs are coming forward with the support through the USDA to be able to get them through what is often called the valley of death, as they have a great idea but are trying to get it to commercialization, and efforts that are leveraging private dollars and public dollars to be able to have these companies move forward into full commercialization where they can create jobs, create renewable energy, get us off of foreign oil, or create other kinds of products. All kinds of opportunities for us around products. And that leads me to another important piece of this, which is R&D, which is always a very, very important part of what needs to be done as we are looking at these new entrepreneurs, large and small, many of them small businesses. In fact, most start as a small business. Somebody with a great idea, and they're looking for how do they turn that into a great business and hiring people and so on. Well, the Biomass Research and Development Initiative is an integral component to bridging the gap between technology development and commercialization. As I said, this is often called the valley of death. If you're somebody out there with an entrepreneur with a great idea, how do you actually convince somebody to invest in it so you can move forward? Nearly $133 million in grants were provided through the research and development effort from 2003 to 2010, and they helped leverage $61 million in private investment. One of the great success stories among many comes out of Wisconsin. We heard about this during one of our Farm Bill hearings when Lee Edwards, CEO of Verint Energy, came in to tell us about the great work his company is doing. They were awarded a grant as seed money to develop their technology with the University of Wisconsin. Verint now has over 120 employees, plans to expand again after receiving a contract from Coca-Cola to develop a 100% plant-based bottle for carbonated beverages. Verint's technology is feedstock neutral, provides drop-in jet fuel and renewable chemicals, and their corporate partners include Cargill, Coca-Cola, and Shell. We also have the Biomass Crop Assistance Program, which helps farmers and ranchers who want to plant energy crops for biomass that would be converted to biofuels or bioenergy. In 2011, this supported between 3,000 and 4,000 jobs. Our investment in the BCAP program could result in companies hiring, in this next Farm Bill, we're told, between 2,000 and 2,600 additional new employees. And we've also addressed issues around collection, harvest, storage, and transport to address problems that had occurred in the last Farm Bill. This provides financial assistance to owners and operators of agricultural and non-industrial private forest land as well. I haven't talked a lot about forest land, but certainly biomass, what's been done around forest byproducts, biomass efforts are very, very important as well. Steve Flick of Show Me Energy received the first BCAP project covering approximately 50,000 acres in 38 counties in Missouri and Kansas. And individual farmers within the boundaries of the project can now sign contracts with the USDA to grow dedicated energy crops. This is another provision that we have in the bill. Show Me's plant in Centerview currently pelletizes crops into biomass fuel for space heat and electric power. This technology will eventually provide liquid fuels that can replace gasoline and diesel. And Steve Flick also testified at our hearing in February. Mr. President, I could go on and on with examples. We have a very exciting project I visited not long ago in Alpena, Michigan, the northeastern part of the state, which is a plant working with a paneling company, Decorative Panels, which is doing beautiful paneling work, 100% wood paneling. They are now taking what used to be waste that they sent to a waste treatment facility. They are now pumping it right next door to a new company that is creating cellulosic ethanol and now looking for other products. One of them will be a new green biodegradable effort to de-ice runways. So there are all kinds of possibilities. And what I'm excited about is this Farm Bill is focused on small businesses, farmers, ranchers, working with the forestry industry. How do we grow the economy by taking the two great strengths that have created the middle class of this country? Growing things and making things. That's what this title is about. That's what this bill is about. And I'm anxious to get us through this process so that we can complete this bill and get on to the next generation of jobs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut is recognized.
Thank you. I ask to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.